Before I describe the exhibition, which we called Qibibilosh or rally, means to take over, meaning to continue. I would like to thank our research funding organizations which made the research and the exhibition possible. We've gotten a generous grant from Parliament for People project from SOAS University in London. And that research fund enabled 2 years research, which then is enabling us to produce this exhibition and a workshop which has already taken place in May 7, which also had its own recording. So today I'll be focusing on the documentation and the description of this exhibition. So with that generous grant, we had a research part and we had also an exhibition which kind of reflects our research. And this exhibition, as I said, its name is ቅብብሎሽ in Amharic. It means to take over, rally, or to continue. And it tries to reflect on the documents we have reviewed and the narrative that has transpired from those documents. And it tries to engage in mapping out women's struggle from the 1950s to 1974 in Ethiopia, and particularly women's students' struggle within the broader student movement context. So we have seen, one, the question of when and how the women's question was raised within the movement of Ethiopian student movement, and two, we have also looked at how the questions of gender relations or the relations between men and women was engaged within the movement called the Ethiopian student movement. And to look into these two questions, we had to dig into the archives of student movement, and which particularly the archives which are found in Institute of Ethiopian Studies in Addis Ababa University. And so this exhibition is trying to have a relationship or kind of an engagement with those archives and kind of curating it with a line that could give us a narrative of how it began and how it evolved and how the questions or women's questions within the Ethiopian student movement was engaged, but also how women's life within the Ethiopian student movement was reflected. So to do so, we had done an archival research, an oral history research, and this exhibition combines a multimedia exhibition, meaning it has an audio-visual part, which we'll look into later, and it has a display of the actual archives. And it has also a display of a narrative that has been curated from the archives, which we will look into, the public archives. It also includes a private archives, which was collected from oral history interviews, which we included a question which says, do you have any object or a material or a book or anything that you have kept for the last 50 years, which had a relationship or a link with the movement time? And some women had contributed photographs, narratives, and we do have a private archive section. And the last section is, we have named it a commemorative section, which tries to engage with commemorating those works and lives of women within Ethiopian student movement. So just to mention some of the student publications that used to come out, this is News and Views, one of the earliest student publications, which also had issues on women. A number of articles we have engaged comes from News and Views. It used to be a paper where students used to write on, or faculties also. This is another News and volume of News and Views. And we have another one which reflects the papers which used to be published outside of Ethiopia. These are Addis Ababa University-centered publications, but the students started to move into other countries and started their own publications. One of them is Challenge, and we have a sample publication here. Challenge used to be published in North America. We have the Amharic version of specifically dealing with women's questions. Tenesh Ethiopiawit. Especially this magazine has a landmark moment whereby issues on women started to come out as a special issue, only focusing on the questions of women, but also lives of women generally within the student movement. So the student movement had its own publications and it had its own evolution on dealing with the women's questions. So it used to be one of the mainstream publication part, but then later on around late 60s and 70s, it started producing its own special issues on women. So it shows that there is an evolution on how the women's question was engaged, but also how women in the movement started to take part in this movement. News shows us the engagement about women's life as students in the university, challenge, and Tenesh Ethiopiawit would show us how the questions of women start to be a special issue publication on their own. And we do have another one, which is a revolutionary call, or what we call argument, which started to come out in the early 70s. So this is one of the sample exhibitions that we put in. So the other section of this room is the oral history section, whereby we, as I said earlier, we tried to create a multimedia exhibition. So that by multimedia we mean that it engaged different genres and different forms into dealing with the research. So the research looked into the archives, but it also talked to some of the participants of Ethiopian student movement, especially the women, to do oral history interviews about their lives in the Ethiopian student movement and how they view the evolution and emergence of the women's question in the Ethiopian student movement. So that section has two parts. One is one of the displays that we have tried to present here, because we began this research from an oral history transcribed archive, which is placed in the Institute of Ethiopian Studies library, which has been done in 2005. There was an oral history project that Professor Bahar Zowde conducted to write about the history of Ethiopian student movement, and a section was dedicated on how the Ethiopian student movement raised the question of women. So when we tried to do this, when we were dealing with our research, one of the founding resources we had to look into was this transcribed oral history document, which dedicated itself into covering on the women's question, which kind of indicated for us, it gave us a site to engage with the necessary to do a comprehensive history of women in the Ethiopian student movement. One of the earliest publications we find is in Ethiopian Observer in 1957. April issue has a special issue on women, which dedicated its discussion on girls' education, on the rights of women, on Ethiopian women in history, on debates on women's emancipation. And especially we have displayed the debates on emancipation about women, because the debate took over in the university campus in 1957, having the motions of like, should women be educated or should not be educated. So that was a debate which happened about women's emancipation in university campus, but was covered in the Ethiopian Observer publication. So this is one of the earliest engagement we find through debate. So as you can see, University College of Addis Ababa debates emancipation, and the emancipation debate, which has happened at that time, was about these themes of like, should women be educated or not educated. So with that motion, those who were debating for educations of women got the highest mark and they received a prize. That's how it's. So the next engagement again we find is within that special issue, there are congratulatory notes that we have received in the 1957 regarding the revised constitution in 1955 of Ethiopia granted women to vote. And following that, following that right, we received a number of congratulatory or celebratory notes from different sections of the world. We have, for instance, letter which came from Eleanor Roosevelt. We have letters from Egyptian feminists, we have letters from Pakistan, we have letters from India, we have letters from different parts of the world congratulating Ethiopian women for now that they can vote, so about their voting rights. So this newspaper, which is Ethiopian Observer, in 1957, one of its issues was to publish those letters which came from different sections of the world, which congratulate Ethiopian women about them being granted to vote. And on one side, those letters congratulate women that they have now the right to vote in Ethiopia, but on the other side, they also urge them to use that right properly. So the next section of the exhibition, we have News and Views, one of the earliest newspapers of student publications, where we find student publications, and it shows a cartoon image which used to be very dominant during that time. This is 1960, for instance, kind of mocking female students, being about partying, not about education. So it shows the earliest moments of engaging with women within university college or within campus. Used to be ridiculing, teasing, mocking. These were the kind of engagement through cartoons and illustrations. And even the editors of the time, which one of them is Ahmed Nasser, for instance, in this exhibit, in his headlines, he says an appeal to young ladies. So this is a way of like encouraging them, but with harsh criticism, why they are not using the university campus as their public deliberations, why they are not using News and Views, the publication, through writing, why they are not participating. So when he raises that sort of, mockery, but also an engagement with the absence of women in the publications, we now started to have responses from women. So one of the earliest responses was given by Almaz Shate, which used to be one of the first female university students who still maintains to be one of the serious gender or women's activists in this country. So she's almost like the veterans of the women's questions in Ethiopia, but also her own life could be a phenomenal achievement through passing through the university college at that time. So she writes in this 1966 article just giving a response to those appeals, which says, why are women absent? And she started saying like, okay, first we have to look into the numbers before we engage them critically, but she also invites those people who are ridiculing or mocking women for being absent in the written tradition to ask themselves as to why we need a research or we need an engagement as to why women are not writing. So there is an interesting invitation that comes from her, which says, perhaps we need to ask ourselves why women are not writing. What type of culture does the university have? Are we encouraging them to write or to be present and to be outspoken? Or are we encouraging them to hide? And how does that reflect the broader societal lives of women? So she engaged with this type of conversation, and she responds back to the mockery or appeal which were given by male students of the time. As I said earlier, our research engaged in oral history section, or it has an oral history part. So this display section, for instance, illustrates books we were given to for this display, which from the oral history participants. These are, for instance, Tenesh Ethiopiawit is one of the very serious special issue publication from North America, which dedicated itself on women's question, explaining women's question, volume after volumes. So one of our informants had this in her shelf, and she shared it to be part of this private collection exhibition. And another participant also gave us the challenge, which I had also, which we also had on the public archive section from her shelf. Some of them also gave us photographs which are kept from that time. So it's this engagement of remnants of the time, then how they are still engaging with their legacies, either by choosing to keep part of their participatory engagements like books or publications of the time, or even photographs beyond their oral narrative. So just to give you a brief description, we tried to display them chronologically. So for instance, this one is in 1974 rally or demonstration photograph. This one is from 1975, the first March 8th celebration in Ethiopia, which, as you will see, like there is a numbers of women. Actually, most of them are dominantly is only women of different classes, different sorts, who came out on public for the first time to celebrate March 8th, 1975. And this one is now after the revolution, when there were conflicting parties between the government and the opposition party, which came out from the Ethiopian student movement. We had anti-government rallies or demonstrations, which started to happen from 1975. So where you have both men and women of high school students. So this shows an anti-government, anti-revolutionary government rally which took over at that time. And this one is after the conflict, post-revolutionary conflict. Now the government started to crack down opposition and began imprisoning women, men and women. But here in this picture we see a very massive number of women who are lined up in prison for their participation in anti-government demonstrations, whether they are participating or not, as mothers, as female students, as just women. They already have been politicized and were kept dominantly in prison at that time. So we'll see that progression from anti-government rally, anti-imperial government rally, and then a celebratory March 8th demonstration, then anti-revolutionary government demonstrations, then imprisonment. So it shows us how collective lives of women was actually weaved in the politics of the time. So this section commemorates, it's a sort of a commemorative sections which we were very lucky to notice. So some of the women who took part in the oral history interviews kept pictures of their comrades from the time, but whose life have passed through the movement in their study tables, and they were generous enough to share it with us with their stories. So their commemorations in this public space as an exhibition is not where it starts. Actually, private individuals continues to commemorate their own comrades, to remember them, to acknowledge their participation in the lives and politics of their country. So one of the friends who was imprisoned with them gave us the narratives and the pictures of at least two female students who used to be part of the Ethiopian student movement, who later then joined EPRP, meaning the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, which later on joined an anti-government stance, which were imprisoned in numbers, and of course most of them were executed by government forces. So these are two of the women and their life stories given to us, but their pictures were in the study tables of their friend, who continues to commemorate them daily in her study room. And then she offered it to us to display it with their stories. So this is the private collection. This is the commemorative sections of the exhibition, which is textile based, as you've seen. We try to print sections of the outputs of the research or the findings of the research. Through this textile printing, our findings in form of a textile print. And so we can describe this as an installation. And the reason that we have used textile is because one of the commemorative elements of women's involvement or engagement in the Ethiopian student movement is one, through their lives. So they actually dedicated their lives. They struggled within the movement. They were part of the Ethiopian student movement, but their history has not been comprehensively included in the history of the Ethiopian student movement. So to do so, to kind of amplify their presence, to kind of show their actual presence, and in the Ethiopian student movement, what we tried to do, as I said, is archival research and oral history research. And the findings that came from this two research is to actually have lists of women, names of women who lost their life during this movement, by being part of this movement, and later by being part of the political organizations which came out of the Ethiopian student movement. So one of the textile print which we have as an installation in the other in there has a list of names of female or women students who were first a student and later part of a political organization who lost their lives and now are commemorated during our oral history interviews by their colleagues from that time. So one of the questions we included in our oral history interview is if they remember their friends, their comrades who were part of the Ethiopian student movement and later they joined a political party and have lost their life as a result of imprisonment and execution, and their names were given to us. So we kind of printed on the textile because the textile symbolizes two things. So in one of the memoirs written in 2021, this year, by one of the leaders of the participant of the Ethiopian student movement, a woman, Tadele Chaile Mikel, who was a keynote speaker in our workshop. She remembers that one of the symbols or one of the ways in which they used to know that female comrades were being taken out of the prison to be executed is when they were asked to take away a shawl or a gabi with them. So their names will be called out by the prison security people, and they will be told to carry a gabi. A gabi is one of the materials in Ethiopia which we use as a covering. It's made of cotton. It looks like this one. And then if a person who is in the prison would be asked to carry a gabi with her, she says in that memoir, we know for sure that that person is to be killed. So to kind of have that sort of material relationship with the life they lost and the symbolism that the time carried, we printed their names and installed it as a textile installment with their names. And the second engagement, as I said, is their participation in political demonstrations. So for that, as I said earlier on, one of the elements of this exhibition is a audio-visual element. So the audio part is the oral history part, which a viewer would listen to, which I have described earlier on. The other is we kind of curated different public videos of demonstrations in which women took part, but also where their members were few in these images, but their narrative in oral history, in the lives they have lost, and in the publications we have engaged in is quite immense. So we have this video displayed, curated by us to show their presence and absence in political demonstrations of the time. And so the last section, as part of the textile installations, we have the engagement aspect of men writing and women responding. In one of the special issue on women, one of the male colleagues asks the female editors why they took a need for women to be organized separately from their male colleagues. So this was later written to the editor, and the editors are by that time 1967 or 74 already women. So the women responds back to say that we are not separating from the main body of the Ethiopian student movement, but we want to emphasize the dual oppression of women within the country and within the movement, and this is why we are dedicating a special issue publication on women's question. So this engagement is displayed here in the textile installment. So his letter to the editor and the editor's response is printed out as part of the engagement. So I'm trying to say this is a commemorative section. It commemorates what women have took part in the student movement, even by giving the price of their life. They took part in demonstration, political demonstration. They took part through writing and engagement within the debates of the Ethiopian student movement in elaborating why they needed a special issue on, which covers a special issue on women's question within the movement. And we also tried to display the numbers of publications which dedicated itself on women's question as a commemorative display or installation. At the end of this exhibition, we have two elements which are remaining from description. One is a documentary film made by Professor Salim Makria on the entire nature of the Ethiopian student movement and how it evolved into a political organization, and how that political organization found itself in antagonistic relationship with the state, revolutionary state, and that started a crackdown and a violent red terror. And that red terror took away lots of life in her own family. And that documentary, we were given a permission to screen it throughout the exhibition time, from May 7 until now, I think the coming week, until June 7. For a whole month, it was part of this exhibition. It has been screening because it gives also a context from a personal history point of view to a broader social movement of the Ethiopian student movement. It gives us a map of it being, starts out as a voice of reason, a voice of criticism, a voice of freedom, a voice of emancipation, to it being a political organization, and then later it brought the entire nation into an era of bloodshed, which the country knows it as a red terror. And that documentary film called DELUGE, or Yewonz Maibel in Amharic, is part of this exhibition. It's being screened in the dark room. And one other element which we have in this exhibition is a textile or a uniform that a woman kept for the last 44 years, which it's a uniform that she took part in a national, there was a development with cooperation, sort of a campaign, a national campaign, which took students to the rural areas, and they had a special uniform. And this woman kept it until today, and she gave it to us as to be part of the display, and that we find it in the entrance of this exhibition. One of the things we did with this exhibition is, beyond opening it for public, is those who came to view the exhibition to write their view of the exhibition, to give us comments, but also how they made sense of the exhibition, and just to put a trace of their participation by viewing the exhibition. So we put a notebook as a site of documentation of people's voice about the exhibition. So we have a number of people who've written, signed their names and give us comments, but also sort of compliments on the exhibition. So I think one of the elements of this output of this exhibition is the fact that it also includes these voices beyond the voices which we also include from the participation in the workshop. In this exhibition, people were given the chance to write their reflections, questions, comments, and compliments about the exhibition, and we've received a number of them. And this notebook will be again part of the documentations of this exhibition. And I just wanted to add that one.